I will be presenting on speech, language, eligibility, and considerations for students with disabilities in Wisconsin. For the 2022-23 school year, 26,296 students were identified as having a speech or language impairment. And what that looks like for IEPs is about 1 in 5 IEPs has speech language as either a direct or a related service. So it is a high prevalence disability area in the state. What is a speech language disability? We have different categories. Articulation is very common, so the ones in red are the ones you're going to see mostly on IEPs. Difficulty producing sounds, K's, G's, M's, P's, S's. Phonology, pattern of sound errors. It might be that the student leaves off the final sound in a word. Fluency, also known as stuttering. Voice, language, semantics, word meaning. Syntax, grammar, and also use of pronouns. Pragmatics, which has more to do with turn taking in speech. We do have developmental curve in speech language, especially for articulation, and we would expect P's, B, D, M, N, H, W to start to lock in around 2 to 3 years. It takes a while for an S to come in. So if a child doesn't produce an S at age 3, you'd wait till about age 5 before you would look at possibly qualifying for speech language. So we do have this, again, this developmental curve. Something down below, mean length of utterance. How many words would we expect a child to say? Once we get up to about 6, and that's at kindergarten, that's considered normal. So even as adults, we say about 6-word utterances. We go to the big park. Legal framework. A speech and language impairment is a disorder affecting speech, voice, fluency, or language that significantly impacts educational performance or social, emotional, or vocational development. In 2010, the DPI approved SLP assistance. In 2012, the DPI approved speech language teletherapy, but we know there is still a huge demand for SLPs across the state of Wisconsin, actually across the country. Recent changes to speech language criteria in Wisconsin in 2021. The first, that speech language pathologists are required to observe the child in their natural environment, could be the classroom, a daycare, as part of the evaluation. Number 2, speech sound production is less than 30% stimulable for incorrect sounds. So what this means is if the student is incorrectly producing the L sound and the speech language pathologist tells them, stick out your tongue, bite down, and go, ooh, and the student goes, ooh, okay, now we're going to practice some words. Look, lizard, leap, and the student is able to do that. Most of the time, we'd say that they are stimulable for that sound. Sometimes the student just needs to be shown the technique and they're able to do that. So in that case, they wouldn't be eligible because they were stimulable for the sound. Also, minus 1.75 standard deviations on test is no longer required, although that is how most students will qualify for speech language services. But we have more complex profiles of students. For example, a student I worked with who had Mobius syndrome, meaning some of the muscles in her face did not develop. So it was physically impossible for her to do a P, B, and M. So there needed to be an emphasis on clinical judgment of what could we do to approximate those sounds, and also that there would not be a standardized test that would represent the student. Speech language eligibility in Wisconsin, there are 5 eligibility categories: language, speech sound production, articulation, speech sound production, phonology, voice, fluency, and then also augmentative and alternative communication. I have some images from some of the AAC devices that I've worked with. So those are the different areas where you can qualify. Once you get into AAC, you might want to reach out to your CISA or a university like UW-Stevens Point that has an AAC lab, or the Wiseman Center, to check out all of the different options available for children. So an IEP for speech language, I put down a few objectives: articulation, phonology. Titus will accurately produce the initial position blends at the word level for PL, SL, GL, and so on. Receptive language, Sarah will label common objects. And I'd like to actually put an example in there so when the parent reads this, it makes sense, such as sled, action, sledding, and concepts. Chili on 4 out of 5 opportunities. Pragmatics, Marcus will demonstrate turn-taking skills during conversation with peers and adults 80% of the time. Down below, I have some images, and those were created with a text-to-image generator. And students made their own images for their target sounds. The girl on the right is running, the R sound, the boy is holding sheet metal, the SH sound, and those are fire flowers. Service delivery model. An SLP can't work directly with students who are receiving RTI if they have not qualified for speech language. The SLP can coach. General education teachers can be a part of those MLSS team meetings, but cannot, again, deliver direct services. So the models are pull-out, push-in services, consultation, collaborative co-teaching, telepractice. Also, speech language can be a direct service or a related service. If it is a related service in the direct service, let's say is SLD is dismissed, speech language then would kind of move into that primary spot as the direct service. Considerations for diverse populations. It really comes down to the text that is in red. The IEP team may not identify a child unless the child has a speech or language impairment within the child's home languages, culture, or dialect. So, in other words, if a student it has an intact, if they're Spanish speaking and they're intact in that language and now they're learning English and they're making some developmental errors in English, they would not be qualifying for eligibility in English, right? Because we'd have this developmental timeline. We know it takes a while for some of these sounds to come into place. What can families and communities do to improve speech language at a very young age here? Phonemic awareness, letter matching. This is big. Ball. What letter does ball make? It makes a B. So let's take some chalk and write out a B. Or shaving cream and make the letter B. Prosody. The nursery rhymes. It teaches intonation, phonemic awareness, timing, coordination. So using the nursery rhymes. Weekly story time at libraries or child care centers. The game Candyland below for turn taking. Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus by Mo Williams. That's an awesome book. And also, if you look at that, Don't Let Pigeon Drive the Bus. Those are all sounds that are in the front of the mouth. And we would expect like a 3-year-old to have those sounds. The wheels on the bus, again, prosody. There are 2 primary organizations that support speech and language, and both of those are connected with hearing also. One at a national level, one at a state. S and R are the most common sounds in English. So if a child is having errors with those sounds, they're going to stand out more, and it's going to seem like their speech is much worse. For example, if they had sounds they had this errors with an M and a D, which are less prevalent. Students who are usually middle school and still receiving speech articulation, it's typically for an R. It's a difficult sound to teach because it's produced further back in the mouth, or sometimes an S. Oh, we do have one more point here, and that is the effect of the pandemic on speech. We have during the pandemic, when people were wearing masks, there were research studies saying, depending upon the type of mask, it could knock down the loudness by 3 to 12 decibels. Of course, we had social distancing, and it also covered the face. And sounds like P, B, M, W, T, H, L are very visual sounds. So children ages 2 and 3 are learning those by looking at other people, and they are also then needing to hear those sounds. So you have kind of a double whammy that happened during the pandemic. And right now we have a lot of students who are in 1st and 2nd grade who are struggling with these sounds, or we have referrals for these sounds, and that wasn't something we had before in speech language. So that's the conclusion. Any questions?